So, Mr. Marty Duren, welcome to the Untangled Faith podcast.
Well, it's good to be here. Thank you.
I don't know when I first stumbled across you. I'm thinking it was Facebook or Twitter
Stumbling is probably the right word.
or your podcast, the
Oh, okay.
Uncommentary podcast, which I was a patron for a short while. I got like a
Thank
sticker
you.
and a mug, and then you left us.
Yeah.
Paying the
I
bills is a
miss it. I
thing.
do. I do miss it, but I just don't see it coming back anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And I love the medium. I love it
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Like I left it and I came back to it, but it's because I don't need it to pay my bills.
That's the whole thing.
And
If you have a full-time job that you can like do this as a hobby, awesome.
yeah,
If you don't have a full-time job that you can support yourself and you need a podcast to do it, I guess you better be Joe Rogan or somebody because I never
yeah.
could make that work.
Yeah, the I think there's a misunderstanding about the money involved in podcasting.
Or lack
And like
thereof.
yes, so the secret, folks, is there isn't any. Like if you see advertising, you think I'm just gonna put ads on my podcast.
Hmm.
Let me tell you. The people that are making a living podcasting aren't making a living from their advertising. Even
Yeah.
some of the bigger podcasts, because it
Wow.
takes a whole lot of ads
Yeah.
to make, what is it
And a
like?
whole lot of listens,
Yeah,
downloads. Yeah.
it's a whole thing. So I did a little research on you. You are in all things writing, freelance
Yeah.
writing,
I like writing.
blogging, authoring, all the things.
Not
And
blogging as
so
much as I should be probably, but I do I do still have one.
I love it. Um, I have to tell you that I have had a goal for, I don't know, a couple years that I was going to make Marty Duren be my friend.
Oh,
And so
really?
this is
Like
about
make me?
yeah, I was going to force
You
you.
should just ask.
Like, well, Marty seems like he asks some interesting questions. Marty seems like he lives in Middle Tennessee, where I live in Middle
I
Tennessee.
do.
Like,
I live in
I could
Hermitage.
run into you at any moment.
Well, I don't know.
Um,
Do you live in Franklin?
I live in Thompson Station.
Oh, yeah. You're not going to run into me at any moment.
Yeah, you're a little bit farther north.
If you're at Green Hills Mall or the or Parnassus Books, you might run into me at any moment. But other than that,
Okay.
I don't get very far south.
Well, it's all right. But
Yeah.
here's what you probably don't remember, Marty, because you didn't have a goal to meet me until now. If you had known it should be a goal,
Have
I'm
we
sure it
met?
would have been. Was in the same space as you in the fall of like 2021 when Russell Moore and Beth Moore were at
Oh,
Emmanuel.
yeah. Yeah.
And you were like sitting in the middle, and I was sitting off to the side, and I thought I should go and
You
say hi
should
to the guy
have.
with the hat. The guy with the hat
He
looks
looks like he's
like
lost.
looks like Marty Duren, and I
It
missed my
was.
chance.
I wish you had.
So do
That was
people
when
often
COVID was
see
still kind of
you?
going on. I think a lot of people were still masking at that time.
Yeah, or like partly masked, partly not
Yeah.
masked. How much are we supposed to mask?
Yeah.
Do people often see you in public and say, "Are you Marty Duren?" Can
No,
I?
that never happens. I used to think that possibly someone would recognize my voice from the podcast. Um, but apparently I did not have a lot of listeners here in Middle Tennessee.
You need to have the right conference that you show up at
Yeah, that's
that
true.
is your people. I just got back from going to the Restore conference in Phoenix,
Yeah.
whereas I'm going to run into anybody that listens to my podcast, they're going to
Yeah.
be there. And somebody came up to me and was like, "Hey," and like maybe someone paid them, but they're like, called me like the Oprah of podcasting. I was like, "What?
Look,
Me? What?
that's worth paying
Okay."
somebody to hear. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So speaking of Beth Moore, I didn't say I was going to ask you this in our prep, but like one of your interviews you did was with
Yes.
Beth Moore and
And
Melissa.
yeah, and Melissa, yeah.
It was so fantastic. I think I've listened to it 3 times.
I need to go back and listen to it. That one was a lot of fun because Beth ended up being in the bathroom so that she could get a signal onto her computer.
This is what we need to hear. We need to hear the behind the scenes. So
It
it
was
was
really
shortly
funny.
after
Melissa was making
she,
fun of her pretty bad.
if you have to go in the bathroom to get a signal, you know
Yeah.
it's bad because you're not going to get the best sound in there.
Yeah.
But this was like right after she had told the world she was no longer with the SBC.
Yeah, and I had tried beforehand, I tried to get her as a very early guest on commentary, but we had never at that point I don't think we'd ever exchanged like tweet messages or any Twitter
Sure.
messages or anything like that. So she didn't know who I was from a hole in the ground. And but after some time when we had connected online and that kind of thing, when I asked her the second time and suggested inviting the kids, who were
Yes.
adults, of course, then she was really open to that. So Amanda didn't get to make it for whatever reason, but we had a great time with Melissa and Beth.
It was so good. A couple things that stood out to me is that, Beth has been through a lot, and so has
Hmm.
Melissa. So the fact that she's really discriminating in who she allows access to just
Apparently
ask
not.
her
Yeah,
questions.
apparently not discriminating enough because I got in there.
But she trusted you for some reason. And that I
Yeah.
think that says a lot about just being in the game for a while and, you know,
Well, there is something to be said for, trying to be consistent, even if you screw up every now and then. If you're not a bomb thrower and that kind of
yeah,
thing, then and people don't feel like that they have to second guess what you might say or, face some kind of weird gotcha question or something like
yeah,
that,
yeah,
then it's a little easier to gain the confidence of somebody that you want to talk to.
yeah. I love that. I could learn from that. Maybe you could teach people how do you get the big guest to say yes. Maybe it is just doing the work for a while and being a trustworthy person.
Yeah, I mean, the more you interact with somebody and they can see that you're not a nut job, then, the better chance you're going to get a yes at some
Yeah.
point, not necessarily the first time you engage. I mean, I've got invitations that I had out there that were never responded to.
It's worth a
Um,
shot.
it's always worth a shot, so you're going to get some that you don't expect and you're not going to get some that you hope for. And all in all, you're going to have a great series of guests.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had just remembered that you existed after having you on my list of people that I want to be friends with. And I was like, oh yeah, Marty Duren. I want to be friends with him. And how can I be friends with him? How can I talk to him? And I found out Marty had a book coming
Oh,
out just the same time
yes.
I was like, maybe I
Oh, well, that was
should.
great. Yeah,
It
that's
was good
awesome.
timing
Yeah.
of yours. And so I want to talk. You have written a whole series of essays in this book, the disparate ones, essays
Yes.
on being in the world and not of the world. But the first thing I
Yes.
really want to ask you about is tell me, oh, you have a matching book. Tell me
Yes.
about the cover because it is, I don't know how to explain it, but it is really cool. And I want to
Yeah.
know how you chose it and tell people who is this person who looks to be, is this like art? Is this like
Yes.
graffiti? What
So,
is it?
so the first thing I was trying to do was think of a cover, and this is art by Banksy. It's on the West Bank divider wall in Israel. And this whole, and if you open it up like that, you can see the whole spread.
So
And that
cool.
was kind of what I decided to do. Well, you can't license Banksy art, but you can license photographs of Banksy's art in
Oh, yeah.
public. And so I just went to, I guess it was Alamy or something like that, and started looking for options. And what I was looking for was something that demonstrated kind of the counter idea of being in the world, but not of the world. And a guy with a mask throwing a bouquet of flowers
Yeah.
is hard to beat if you're looking for something that is disparate, something that's unique and says something different. Now, this person that's standing here is a random person who was looking at that mural when the picture was taken. I don't know who it is. The person taking the picture probably didn't know who it is either.
That's
So
so
that's how it started was I was looking for a way to illustrate it. And I had seen this in person. And in Banksy has a hotel in the West Bank. It's called the Waldorf Hotel, play on Waldorf.
Oh,
And so he has a display in the lobby that is this mural in three different pictures. So you have the bouquet in one picture, the face in one picture, and then the hand stretched out in the other picture. So I was aware that it existed, and the place that it is located in real life has some pretty significant meaning to me. And so then I started looking for a word that I could use. I did not want to use the word unique because it just sounds dumb. So I went to Roger, my good friend Roger Thesaurus, and looked up all different words that I could find until I found one that the definition was close enough that it really aligned with the cover and aligned with what I was hoping to do in the content as well. So that's how the cover came to be. I really do like it. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I would be lying if I said I thought I could do that every time I wanted to do a book.
it's so
But I'm really
cool.
happy with this one. Yeah.
When you hear people talk about their book covers, journeys, it can be quite traumatic for people
Yeah.
they have to fight for, like, oh, that first one that was suggested to me, or like it was bad.
I
It's
mean,
so
I've
bad.
seen
So
big press, the top five labels, and every cover's not a good cover, and every cover's not worth putting on a book. But I mean, I address a little bit of this in one of my essays, but there seems to be themes where there's a whole genre of cover
yeah.
comes along, and everybody wants it all to look like James McBride's Heaven and Earth grocery store or whatever for 6 or 8 months. And then they move on to Sarah Moss, I think that's her name, and that real stark medieval looking stuff. Then everybody's going to do that for 6 months or whatever. And so it just gets to a point where every book starts looking the same, and that's where they just kind of lose me.
Tell me about books because you have a love affair of books. You
Yes,
could never
I would,
have too many.
that's probably the only way to say it. I do like books. I like to buy them, not just to get them from the library, though I'm certainly not opposed to that. It's the only thing that I do. It's the only hobby that I have. I don't golf. I don't ski. We don't travel. So I collect books and I get them from almost everywhere that you can get a book. And I don't buy a book just because it's there. It's not like I'm just going and taking an armload at the counter at Goodwill of stuff that was that, 50 cent day or whatever.
Yeah,
But if I find something that's in a genre that I want to read or want to have a reference library, however small it might be, then yeah, that's going to be a possibility.
that's so cool. Well, I marked up your book a lot. I have a lot of underlines. I have a lot of marks on here. It was so fun to be like, I was sitting in the family room and my kids are watching me. And I was like, oh, what's happening, Marty? What does this mean? And what's going on here? So it was just really fun. And I love that it's like you would describe it sort of as like a pocket book where
Yeah,
it's not a huge book. You could sit down and read it pretty quickly, but like how many essays did you have? Like
there's
16?
18, I
There's
think.
18 in there.
Yeah,
And you hit a lot of different topics.
yeah,
And it was just fun to be like turn
17.
around to be like, hey guys, listen to this. What do you think of this? Like, what are you
Yeah,
reading, Mom?
I have
What is
kind of a
that?
weird attention span anyway, so a 168-page book on the same subject would be kind of a struggle for me, maybe one day, but I really do like to learn about different things. And if I feel like that I've got enough comprehension to say something intelligible and possibly meaningful, then it's worth writing something about. So that's kind of how all these essays, as
Yeah, well, I
it's,
can see why somebody like that would be drawn to podcasting because you're curious.
yeah,
You have questions to ask. So the premise of your book is, summarized in the subtitle. It's about being in the world, but not of the world, which is, I'm assuming, from the passage in John where Jesus
yes.
talks about being not of this world. We probably turned it into a Hobby Lobby phrase that didn't exactly exist in scripture, but something I've been thinking, you could get it on a pillow or something, is that all my life, Marty, I'm a Gen X. I'm 48 years
Okay.
old. So I'm just a little behind you, I'm assuming. I was warned about the world, Marty. I was
Hmm.
warned the world was going to be antagonistic to my faith, my Christian
Hmm.
faith. And I was ready. I read Left Behind. I watched A Thief in the Night. I knew
Oh, yeah, I
the
remember them.
guillotine was going to come for me.
Yep.
People are going to say, renounce your faith
Scared me to death. Every
or
time I
you
went home and my mama
or you're
wasn't in the
gone.
house, I thought the rapture had happened.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so seriously though, we were warned the world is going to make it hard for you.
Yeah.
But here we are sitting in 2025, and in the United States, I would argue that we get more pressure to adopt worldly behavior by people and institutions and communities that claim the name of Christ. I feel like what we're seeing here in the US in 2025 is often it's Christian institutions and those who claim the name of Christ that are really challenging what I believe is a true expression of my Christian faith.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that? Have you seen that?
Yeah. So similar when I was younger, we were taught, rock music is bad and, going to the wrong movies is bad. And sometimes going to movies at all, playing any kind of cards, except maybe, Uno, where you don't have the Joker card or whatever. All that was worldly. And I was taught that if you have hair over your ears and you're a guy, yeah, if you wear pants and you're a female, all those kinds of things.
Do you play
Were
cards with face cards?
Oh yeah,
That
we
was
were
a
taught
thing.
not like all through my growing up, but we were taught
Yeah.
periodically through my growing
Yes.
up that playing any kind of card game with face cards was bad.
Yeah.
And so I had, I was pretty bold. I wasn't converted, actually converted until after high school, but I believed I was a Christian in high school, and I was pretty bold. I had a t-shirt I had two t-shirts that I had made at the mall. One of them was an airbrush that says no greater love. I still actually have it downstairs with a cross on it, and I would wear that to high school. I had a dark blue t-shirt that I had made with white block felt letters on it that said Jesus is the way. I
Oh,
wore that to
wow.
high school. And I can honestly say I was, yeah, there was a snicker every now and then, or why are you wearing that every now and then, or something like that. But, actually persecuted for my faith or anything resembling that, no, never happened.
Yeah.
There were far more many people who were complimentary and encouraging and all that kind of thing. So I don't know where all those pagans were when I was growing up. The ones I was warned about never showed up. Not even at Halloween. I never even got a razor blade on my apple. I don't know where all those people are. And so then as I got older, and I would hope matured in my faith some, it became clearer that what the world, if you take the scriptures idea of the world, consisted of was a lot broader than these few things that had been picked out of a certain range of churches as exhibitions of worldliness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not caring for the oppressed, not speaking up for who are have no voice for themselves besides the unborn. That was the only category of those who couldn't speak for themselves when I was growing up. There was nobody outside that. And so then to grow up and find out that sex trafficking exists and human trafficking exists and that there really are economic situations that have been dealt with by theologians in Central America and South America that we've never even began to deal with in America, this
Yeah.
context. And then to find out that the African American experience was so different than my own and begin to grow in some of those by listening to some friends who knew the Lord but had grown up with totally different experiences than I had because of their skin color. All of that then began to really expand what I understood being of the world and not being of the world to mean. Um, and so when we read in First John that these things are of the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Well, those are big categories. Those are not small categories.
Yeah. Yeah.
When Satan says to Jesus, I'll give you the kingdoms of the world, and we spend so much of our time trying to explain why the kingdoms of the world are really okay. And we should feel more at home in these kingdoms of the world because we can do more if we're feeling at home. When that wasn't what the early Christians did, it wasn't what the scriptures teach, it's not how the apostles lived. And the more that you dig into that, that being not of the world is so broad that if we were, I don't want to use a derogatory term here, but if we were bold enough,
Mm.
if every church was bold enough to sell all it has and give to the poor,
Hmm.
rather than we need new barns and bigger barns, I think it would say something different to the world that we live in. But we don't know because it hasn't been tried here
Yeah.
ever,
When
probably.
when you messaged me beforehand to be like, hey, so kind of which way are we going? And I was like, I gotta want to do this. And can you fix it all? Can you just tell me how to fix it?
Well, I was a card carrying member of the moral majority. I mean, my wife and I gave
Yeah.
money every month to the moral majority. We were convinced that redeeming culture to not redeeming people, not redeeming Americans, but redeeming America was the goal.
Hmm.
And I can no longer find that in scripture, Isaiah 40, where the scripture talks about the nations are like dust on the scales and they're a very
Yeah.
small thing to the Lord. Well, if they're a very small thing to the Lord, they should be a very small thing to me. And if Madagascarians, and I don't know if that's how they refer to themselves or not, but if Madagascarians are Christian nationalists, then that's not good. If the Chinese Christians are Christian nationalists, that's not good. So it's
Yeah.
no better for American Christians to be Christian nationalists either.
Yeah.
Because to be a Christian nationalist, you by default, you have to put every other Christian in the world at arm's length
Mm.
because your primary call is not to build disciples globally, it's to build your country. And I just don't, I cannot find that that's the goal of the New Testament church. So,
Well, was there something that happened that made you think, oh, I think I'm going the wrong, maybe the moral majority isn't the answer?
so the first thing that
No.
happened to me, I think, and that's a really good question because I don't know that I could put my finger on it exactly. But in the last church that I pastored, that I was senior pastor of, I made a conscious decision to go to church conferences that weren't Southern Baptist.
Okay.
So I stopped going to the conferences that were big conferences held by the big churches in our denomination. And I started going to conferences that were held by churches outside of our denomination. And I went to a number of conferences that were sponsored by Asbury Seminary, which is out of the Methodist tradition. And they featured all kinds of speakers that I'd never heard of who were as solid as the day is long, but they were coming from a different background than I was. And so that was kind of the beginning of getting out of a bubble that I was
Mm.
in to find, the old joke is you're going to, Baptists are going to get heaven and be surprised to find they're not the only ones
Yep,
there.
yep, yep.
And so I kind of began to experience that through those conferences. And then that led to reading books outside of the recommended reading list that I'd grown up with and the theologians I'd grown up with. And so, probably one of the big things that happened, you mentioned you wanted to talk about Palestinians, and we can move into that now or we can wait a
Yeah,
little
let's do
bit.
it.
Okay. So, this would have been in the mid 90s. I was on staff at a church and probably there was something going on in the Middle East. The only reason I can think of to have asked this particular person this question. So I happened to be friends at that time with a then Southern Baptist Seminary president and very well known for his love and support of Israel. And so I probably wrote him a letter because I don't think he did email. So I wrote him a letter and asked if I could only read one book about the Middle East conflict with Israel, what book would you recommend that I read? And so it was this book right here, Blood Brothers by Elias Shakur. And I had no idea who he was, had no idea what the book was, but based upon this guy's recommendation, I got this book. Well, Elias Shakur is a Palestinian Christian Orthodox priest, and his family lived in Palestine pre 1948. So his family had always lived in Palestine. And he was there as a child when the First World War ended and the Middle East was carved up between France and Britain and somebody else, I think. And the mandate for the Palestinian area went under Great Britain. And his family was there as the immigration of Jewish people from Europe began in earnest and they experienced displacement as the military would come in and demand that people leave their homes. And as I was reading it, of course, I was completely shocked. I had zero background for that part of the story. What I had always been taught growing up was this miraculous restoration of Israel to the land and that God protected them in 1948 and God protected them in 1967 and God sustained them and killed all their enemies and all this kind of thing. And so this book really upset my mindset. And the fact that it came from a guy that I knew to be so strongly pro-Israel really carried extra weight with me because it was almost like he was saying there's more to the story than you're aware of, and this is how you need to get started, which I greatly respect from him at that time because he went on to do some not so greatly respected stuff. So
Yeah.
as a result of that, later I was preaching on end times at the church and just begin to think about okay, well there's Christians in Palestine that aren't Jewish. There's Palestinian Christians and these are my brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
And anyone who is an Israeli who's not a believer in Jesus as the Messiah, is not my brother or sister in Christ. And so I was like, what am I, why am I supporting a political regime that's really causing some harm to my brothers and sisters in Christ? So then I started reading up some other books.
That's a good question.
And then maybe 2000, no, 2020, 2019, somewhere along in there. I thought, well, what I need to do is I just need to go to the Palestinian territories and see for myself. And so I found a church that had some partnerships in the West Bank, and they allowed me to tag along two different times. So we went and we did the typical, Sea of Galilee, Sermon on the Mount, Mount of Olives, all those kinds of things. But at night, we didn't stay in a hotel in Jerusalem. And in the day, we didn't stay and see all the sights inside the holy city, unquote. We stayed on the Palestinian side of the wall. And so we were there like 9 days, two trips, 9 days each trip. And we stayed with the Palestinians. Our hosts were Palestinian. We attended predominantly Palestinian churches. We got to know the Palestinian people. The group I was with mostly did, and I attended seminars that they did for Palestinian social workers. And so they had these long tenured relationships that they had built with Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims. And they were very, very deeply trusted by all of these people. And when I began to listen to them talk about what's it like to live here, it was definitely not the white
Mm.
evangelical, dispensational, fundamental, premillennial, end times left behind
Yeah.
type theological structure. It was very much, man, everybody over here has PTSD. And we were there the second trip I think that I was there. And the Israeli military did an incursion one night into the West Bank and attacked in a refugee camp and shot and killed a 17-year-old medic. And that happened at night. Next day, we had gone a mile away, walked probably a mile away to a school that we were ministering to some of the students. And we got word that that had happened and there was going to be like a protest in the streets in the West Bank. And so we hurried back because the air was electric with frantic and frustrated Palestinians
Yeah.
in the streets. They weren't violent, they weren't throwing anything, but the body language was such that we felt like there could be some kind of real breakout at any point. So we got back to our place and stayed there for the rest of the day. But it's those kinds of things people don't, people in the West generally and American Christians very specifically do not understand the occupation. They do not understand the enormous pressure that Palestinians live under day by day by day as a result of the occupation. And the only thing they ever hear is if Hamas shoots off rockets
Yeah.
or October 7th, which was a horrific
Hmm.
tragedy
Yeah.
that I wish had never happened. But most American evangelicals have no idea of what leads up to those kinds of things that lasts oftentimes for years before there's a breakout of violence. So
Yeah.
that's what really, and I've got a stack of books here if you want me to hold them up in case anybody's
Oh,
interested.
I bought 100 Years for
You see that
in
one?
Palestine because you tweeted about it or put
Oh,
it.
awesome.
I was like, well, if Marty says it's good, I've seen it mentioned enough times now.
Yeah. So this
So
is an
I earned
excellent
some
book.
cool points with my college kid for getting that book. I
So
sure did.
this is an American Palestinian academic and his family, as you know, from Palestine all those years. This is a really, really good book from a theological, biblical perspective. Whose Promised Land by Colin
Mm,
Chapman. He's a British,
yeah.
I think, theologian. That's a really good one if you're looking for some of the theological. And I would recommend this one for anybody who wants a Jewish perspective. It's called A Stranger in the Land: Jewish Identity Beyond Nationalism
Mm,
by Daniel Brecher. Also a very good book. So I encourage, there's a lot of books out there by Jewish authors
yeah.
who are taking the Palestinian side of things. And it's really
Interesting.
important, I think, to get that context.
I was probably sometime after, you know, all of the fighting had happened again,
Mm,
this new conflict that had happened starting a couple years ago, that people started talking about it again. Ideas about how, the evangelical church really feels like, and it might have been listening to a Holy Post episode or an interview with somebody where they said it's sort of like this lucky rabbit's foot that a
hmm
lot of like American politicians do. and
Yeah.
oftentimes like white evangelicals here in the US when it comes to how they handle Israel. Is
Hmm.
it does seem like, well, if we will be blessed if
Yeah.
we give a pass to, of course they must be doing everything right, the
Well,
benefit of the
they
doubt.
everybody runs back to that verse, don't whoever touches you touches the apple of my eye.
Yeah,
And there's just a real lack of realization that most of the Jews in the world do not live in Israel.
yeah,
And the political entity known as Israel is not the people of God that was promised in the Old Testament. The Jewish people are. And all around the world, literally, you can go anywhere in the world and you will find Jewish people who oppose the state of
yeah,
Israel.
yeah.
And I just wish that more American Christians grasped that the politics of it is the problem, not the Jewish people, but it's the
Mm.
politics of it.
Have you had any luck with having conversations with people that don't get that, for them to be able to engage at all and be like, oh, okay, tell me more? Or
Yeah,
are
most of the
people,
time it's people who have already started kind of doubting kind of what they've been taught or they'd seen something online. I mean, I could literally post something about Palestine every day and people would they'd get weary of it. But the ethnic cleansing that's now been presented not only by the current president of the United States, but ministers in the Israeli cabinet, there's just so much
yeah,
that people would eventually just turn me off because I mean, you can literally talk about it only so much before people are just dazed with the amount of
yeah.
information.
I get that. We have a really short attention span.
Hmm.
And if you can't explain something really quickly and easily to somebody, they really aren't able to stick with you, especially if it's going to question some pre-existing idea that they already have. And
Deeply held beliefs we're talking about.
it, yeah. So I I'm like just barely learning about some of this stuff, but you're right. The proximity to different ideas and different people really does change things. I remember the first time I questioned anything about what I thought about Israel being, you know, getting the benefit
Hmm.
of the doubt, the nation, the political party that's in
Hmm.
power now, was because a friend was a missionary in the Middle East. She and her husband were a part of a creative access missions thing with the
Yeah.
Christian
Yeah.
Missionary Alliance. And she was like, we're seeing this with our eyes.
Mm.
The Palestinian people aren't
Yeah.
100% evil and deserving to be destroyed for living in,
Hmm.
for wanting to live in their home. And, I think that's how it is. You know somebody that you respect has an experience and you bump up against it, and then you have to decide what to do with that.
Yeah.
There's the
Definitely.
dissonance. You have to resolve it somehow. Like, do I believe that person
Yeah, and that's
or
true,
not?
and that's true in so many areas.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going through stuff in our own country right now where the cognitive dissonance is astounding. I mean, it'll
Yes.
rattle your whole head around.
Yeah.
And there's so much out there, you can't research everything to see if everything's accurate. So I
Yeah.
read one time years ago that the average the average New York Times newspaper, so this would have been maybe 20 years ago, that the New York Times newspaper contained one day's edition contained more information than a farmer in the 1850s would accumulate in their lifetime. And our brains, I mean, obviously, I think we have we've advanced to the point that we can handle more information,
Yeah.
but the amount of information has advanced even more than our ability to process it,
Yeah.
and
My
we're really at a
interview with Dr.
disadvantage.
Dr. Karen Swallow Prior, she said the same thing. This is
Yes.
a new
Yeah.
dark age, right?
Yeah.
It's not a lack of information, it's so much.
Yeah.
We don't know how to engage with it and know what's true and what isn't, and we just move on to the next thing. You had
Yeah.
mentioned Christian nationalism, and I mean, this is a big thing. People are talking about it a lot, but I've also seen people that are more have more of affinity to the ideas of Christian
Hmm.
nationalism and how it works in the world. They'll hear that term and their eyes glaze over, or they shut down completely.
Hmm.
How would you explain to somebody that just says, "Well, tell me what I love my country. So what's so wrong with that?
Yeah.
What's the
So
difference?"
patriotism is love for country. Christian nationalism is the idea that your country is special before God and needs your help to turn to God in some undefined way. Some people define it as reinstituting the Old Testament law, which they didn't even do in the New Testament church. And they have all kind of weird ways to get around why that should happen. But the concept basically is that the political systems of your country should be taken over by Christians and then utilized to instill some measure of Christian legal framework. And I guess they can argue that since, we have laws that say you shouldn't kill and shouldn't steal, and that came from the Ten Commandments, then, we can just expand that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what it always turns into is just one more way to apply power from those who have power. So a lot of Christian nationalists are what I would call just like uber extremes. This is not about patriotism for them. This is about importing their hyper patriarchal views where women can't vote, where the head of a married house should get more votes because he's representing more people. I mean, all this has its weird roots, not at all to quote Tim, what's his name, that was the VP, but has its weird roots in Christian nationalist thinking. And it probably goes back beyond that to some other stuff. I'm not even an
Yeah.
expert in
Yeah.
theonomy or whatever. But patriotism is, I mean, you can love your country, you can love another country, you can appreciate all the countries, but you love yours more because you know it better. You were raised here, you know its faults, its foibles, and you know its successes and its victories. You can love your
Yeah.
country. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But loving your country doesn't mean you have to hate some other country.
Mm.
I don't have to hate. I love Canada. I love Kenya. I love places where I've been to visit. I love those places. I've got a Palestinian flag wristband because I hope that there's a Palestinian state at some point, and I'll go
Yeah.
visit that. But this idea that I can only love my next door neighbor, or I have to love my family and then my next door neighbor and then my community neighbors before I can love anybody else is contra scripture. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
not it's not the Ten Commandments. I mean, not sorry, it's not the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
It's not the Great Commandment. It's not the Great Commission. Christians have enough capacity to love everybody in the world at the same time. That doesn't mean you're loving somebody you've never met as much as you love your spouse. That's just silly
Yeah.
to think that. But we can love a lot of people and desire for them to be saved and desire for them to know the blessings of God and not turn it into our army's bigger than yours.
Yeah. And I like how you said that you loving your country is also seeing it honestly, the good and the
Yeah.
bad. You talk about a lot of controversial things that some people
Who,
won't
me?
touch
Me?
in your book and online.
Yeah.
And so I see you being willing to like go there and say some things. And as somebody who has been a pastor,
Yeah.
you also still preach occasionally at
Occasionally.
your church. I would imagine you hear from pastors that are afraid to say the things that you say,
Well, it's turned,
possibly.
I think it's
If,
almost turned into they're afraid, some churches are afraid to have me come say them. The reality is, I don't,
yeah,
I usually do this kind of the super controversial stuff is stuff I do as a public theologian. I mean, all you got to do to
yeah,
be a public theologian is talk about theology in public. I mean,
yeah,
it's not a rocket science here.
yeah,
And so I enjoy it. I think I do have some gifting in that area. But if your pastor were to call or whoever's pastor were to call, say, I need you to come fill in this week, what would you talk about? I'm not going to go down there and talk about the latest, thing that Elon Musk did.
yeah,
I'm
right.
going to find a passage of scripture and find out how it applies in the life of the church. And that's what I'm going to talk about. But I do think that there can be for a person like me, not just me, but for a person like me who spends a lot of time in the public conversation, that it can be thought of as, well, this guy's only going to talk about politics, and so he can't come preach at our church or something like that. But anyway, I long ago gave that to the Lord. I'm
Yeah.
available whenever he opens the door for me. And until then, I'll just, keep running my mouth.
No, I think we all have our thing, all our space to run in.
Yeah.
And yours is running your mouth
Or
and
my
your
keyboard, as
fingers,
the
you're
case might
typing,
be. Yeah. Yeah.
right? But yeah, it this is an interesting place to exist in that space in Middle Tennessee here,
Yeah, for sure.
sort of like you know, the heart of the evangelical industrial complex and a lot of MAGA
Had a friend who
world
used to call it Geneva.
has really gotten into our
Yeah.
churches too. Like you
Yeah.
know it. Like you could probably picture some of the same churches and pastors I'm picturing. You're like, what happened?
Yeah. Well, the bumper stickers tell the story,
Yeah.
when you drive into the parking lot. I really think, and I'm giving everybody the benefit of the doubt here because I don't know anybody's heart,
Yeah.
but the issue of abortion was and is so strong that virtually every other thing became subservient to whoever would say I'm opposed to abortion.
Hmm.
And so for years and years and years, it was the Republican Party. And to be right with God or to vote right anyway, then you had to vote Republican because Republicans were pro-life. And I can't tell you how many conversations have been that exact thing.
Yeah.
Well, you have to vote pro-life. You have to vote pro-life. Well, what about what else this person believes? Well, we just have to vote pro-life. And so that was it for years and years and years and years. And so I think it made it as the Democratic Party didn't just embrace the right to abortion, but they began to champion
Hmm.
the unfettered right to abortion. They didn't even give a lip service to the value of the unborn.
Yeah.
And they were so far on that side of things that it became difficult for white evangelical Christians to say, well, I can vote for a Democrat because they're pro union and I'm in a union. Uh, you couldn't say that in church anymore because that same Democrat was going to be very, very pro choice. And so I think what happened then is we moved from Bush to Obama, and then McCain ran, and then Romney ran, and then I guess Trump was after whatever order that was in. I guess Trump came
Yeah. Yeah.
along after that. And by that time, the pro life ethos was just baked in to the voting. And there's other factors. I'm not trying to play
Yeah.
down a
Yeah. I get
multitude
it.
of other factors, but I do think that that's real because I've heard it so much
Yeah. I
that,
was that person. I mean, I think
yeah,
it took Donald Trump to wake me up to what in the world
yeah,
is happening.
yeah. I mean, factually, then when you look at it, it's like abortions haven't gone down since we were
Yeah.
told they were going to go down. And so,
Yeah. I think I needed to learn that, oh, anybody could say any darn thing they want just
yeah,
to get your vote. And it doesn't impact, it might not change anything about anyone's life
yeah.
one way or
There's a
another.
verse in scripture in Romans, I think, that says, who are you to judge another man's servant or something like that?
Mm,
And it's talking about in the context of it that at some point we're answerable to God
yeah.
only about decisions that we make. And so if we were in a situation in America where there was literally one thing on the ballot and it was abortion, it would be easy.
Yeah.
There's never
Yeah.
just one thing on the ballot. I mean,
Right.
I know people who would not vote for a dog catcher unless that dog catcher said they were pro-life. They have nothing to do with
They
anything,
will
but
tell you about it in Williamson County if if they're running for dog catcher, if they are pro-life or
oh
not.
wow. Uh, so 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 my wife and I are on the ACA and have been now for several years. My wife's had two cancer surgeries and an open heart surgery in the last since 2015 or 2016.
Mm-hmm.
She's not going to get health insurance
Yeah.
through. I mean, if I ended up working for a Fortune 500 company and they got a gigantic group plan, then yes, she might get health insurance that way. But as long as I'm not in that situation and she's not in that situation, then literally our only option is the healthcare marketplace. And if it were to
Don't
go
get me started
away,
on health sharing plans.
yeah, I know. But if it were to go away
Yeah.
and, that's been talked about over and over again, or if subsidies were removed that made it affordable for people who don't have 80, 90, $100,000 a year incomes, then we'll be without insurance.
Yeah.
And if we had been without insurance since 2016, my wife would already be dead. There's no way that she would have survived all the stuff that she's had happen to her. So when I go vote, I don't make any bones about this. I look and see what the person's position, if they're at the level to affect it. I'm not talking about city
Yeah. Yeah.
council, but if they're at the level to affect it, I do want to know what their position is on the sustainability of the ACA
Yeah.
because it affects us directly. It's not something that's just out there theoretically that might affect some other people.
Yeah.
And I just happen to believe that my wife is created in the image of God and that her life is important and has value.
Yeah.
and that I should do everything that I can to make sure that she's sustained as much as she can be. And I think that's as biblical as standing for life in the womb.
Mm. That's a word. Once again, proximity can change things
Yeah,
too. Where
absolutely.
people don't realize when they're saying the ACA is terrible, Obamacare is terrible, they don't realize they're talking about your access. They're not
Yeah,
talking about Marty's wife. They don't
yeah.
realize that it is your family or like get rid of all this waste, get rid of all this, and you forget about the real people involved in that. And so I love that you do this public theology. I think not everybody can do it, but I'm glad that you have the conversations. I'm glad that
Well,
people can
good. Thank you.
stumble onto it, in and out of it, in a way that is not going to threaten them. I mean, it might
Yeah,
feel like people might be like, I'm not going to friend Marty online, but I might look him up and see what he's saying,
yeah.
right?
And I'm certainly
'Cause
not perfect.
you
I
just
had
never
somebody
know.
reach out to me just last night. I had somebody reach out to me last night and say, I think you went overboard on this comment
Mm,
right here, and told me why. And I wasn't 1,000% sure that I agree with him at first,
yeah.
but when I thought about it, I was like, yeah, that's true. So I
And
went
what
in
does
and
it
edited
cost
it.
to consider it
Yeah,
that I
nothing.
might have gone over? Like,
Yeah.
that's a,
I mean, pride is the only thing to keep me from considering it.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, who are you to tell me what to do? Well, if I do that, then I'm really messed up.
yeah. Well, I told you I wanted to ask you about this RNS article from
Yeah.
2021. I went on the record for this article that came out in January 2021. My husband used to work for Ramsey Solutions.
Yes.
And this guy named Bob reached out to me at some point because I wrote a blog post that got us in a lot of trouble. And he happened to notice it before I took it down. And he's like, "Hey, do you have a story to tell, Amy Fritz?" And I was like, "I don't know about you, Bob.
He is that way. He
I
sees
do not
stuff.
know
My
about you. I've
word.
seen what Christianity Today does." He's like, "But I'm actually an artist."
Yeah.
It was a whole thing.
Yeah.
But if you remember, like this big article came out in January 2021, but it was a well-sourced
Yeah.
article. It was
Yeah.
good in and of itself. But the thing heard around the world was the publishing of the response to request for comment to the company that RNS was like, let's publish this
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And because I know your friend, I know you know Bob.
Yeah.
I am just curious of what you thought when you read that description of him and that response and
Yeah.
did that resonate with you?
I'd actually forgotten about that
I had to
until I
remind
clicked
you.
on it and reread it. So yeah, so every award-winning journalist is going to get drug a time, or somebody's going to attempt to drag them a time or two.
Yeah.
But I mean, Bob does not make a lot of mistakes. He sources stuff, he double sources stuff, triple if necessary. I know he personally sat on a story for a long time. Or I know personally, I should say, I know personally he sat on a story for a long time and would not break the story, though because he had almost all he needed,
Hmm.
but he didn't have all that he needed.
Yeah.
And then somebody else broke the story. Well, he was ready then with follow ups based on the story that somebody was able to break because he had all this stuff, that was just sitting there. But he would not publish it until there was enough confirmation that it was accurate. So I have a lot of respect for him. But that letter is just like,
They made
you
it sound
know,
like he was living in his mom's basement, like
oh my gosh. I mean,
doing
it's just
random.
like eight middle schoolers got together and decided to drag their teacher
It sounded
because
like Dave wrote
they
it
got
himself while intoxicated.
that was the that really says more about the organization that's willing to publish something or willing to put out something like that than it does for the person that
Yeah.
they're
Here's
attacking.
the thing I thought was fascinating is when I asked Bob afterwards, he's like, I actually felt bad for them
Yeah.
because I knew they could have come up with a better. That wasn't the best. That wasn't their best face.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they're kind of at the point that stuff like that just rolls off. They're not some weird thing like here I go again using that word, some uncalled for thing
Mhm.
like that just rolls off. Like, I mean, I'd forgotten about it.
I
And
know.
99% of the people that are going to hear this or see this have forgotten about it if they knew about it in the first place.
I asked online, like, does anybody remember this happening like 4 years ago or whatever? And what you thought. And Richard Clark said it was that he remembered it being the biggest cell phone in all of
Oh, yeah.
evangelicalism.
Yeah. I mean, there's
I
just
love
some
that.
things that are better not done, and trying to sarcastically get the upper hand on somebody when A, you don't have the writing or the humor talent to be able to pull it off. I mean, they should have called me. I could have done it.
You have some things you could say.
I
You
mean,
know things.
I could have really messed with him pretty good, but Dave blocked me years ago on non-Twitter, so I don't get to.
It's
And
okay. So here's the final question,
okay,
lighthearted question. You wrote a whole chapter about one word. One word.
yeah,
Marty, you even footnoted or endnoted it?
yep,
And
yep.
did I look up the end in
Yeah,
the
that's the
book
whole
to
point.
see what
That's the
you,
whole point.
the word impactful? Tell me, did it hurt you as a child?
It's not a word. It wasn't around when I was a child. We knew better than to say stupid stuff like that. No, I just have. I'm all for coining words. I love writers who take the leap and they make it. I mean, Shakespeare did it all the time.
Yes.
They create their own terminology for either a character or because there's not a word that expresses clearly enough what they want to say. I
Yeah.
love that kind of stuff. That word just sounds dumb. It just sounds like it
Not
doesn't
creative
belong
enough.
in the English language. So yeah, that was my shot across the bow, especially to AP and all these other people that are, if they haven't already put it in the dictionary, I know they're going to. It's just a matter of time. It's probably already in there, but you're never going to hear me say that word. If I do, then somebody has slipped me a Mickey because I will never
That would
say
be
that
the
word out
sign that
loud.
something
That's
terrible has
yes,
happened to
that's the
Marty.
thing. That's the thing. If
Like
I've been
if you've been
kidnapped, here's my
abducted.
sign. This is how you're going to know if I've been kidnapped. I'm going to use the word impactful in a sentence.
Well, I am so thankful that I was able to check off this bucket list item of
Well,
making
thank
you
you so much. I'm
a
so
parent.
glad you reached out.
It's so fun. Well, how can people find you and find your book and support you?
Yeah, so it is called the disparate ones. If that's a new word for you, it's not desperate, but it's really similar.
Yes.
Disparate. I don't know that anybody is stocking it anywhere, but you can order it anywhere that you order books. I
Yeah.
mean, almost. If it's a bookstore that you can order any book through, you can order this one. So Books a Million, Tertulia Bookshop, the big honkers, Powell's, any of those like that, and of
Yeah.
course Amazon. And yes, I would absolutely love for you to pick up a copy for yourself and for all your families and friends and enemies. Give it as birthday and wedding presents, anniversary gifts. I hear that men just love this
Graduation.
book, ladies. Graduation. Oh, I actually think it would make a great graduation
I
gift.
do think it would be a great graduation gift.
Then online, I'm not on Twitter. I do still have an account, but I
Hmm.
don't X whatever. I don't X anymore.
Yeah.
I'm on Blue Sky. It's just I wish they had a better system, but it's at Marty Duren dot Blue Sky dot social or
If they look
whatever.
you up, they'll find you there.
Yeah. And then I'm on Facebook and I don't remember if my account is still public there or not, but I can't remember. Anyway, you can look me up and friend me. I don't respond to friend requests, but about once every 2 months, so don't get discouraged. And
So
then is there somewhere else? Oh, that's pretty much it. My
if
blog
people
is
want to find you, they can find
blog.martyduren.com.
your website, I think. They
Yeah,
want to hire
blog dot
you
marty
for
duren. I'm sorry.
they want to hire you for editing.
Yeah, that's right. Martyduren.com is where you can go to, like, that's the central location. But if you want to read my periodic blog, it's blog.martyduren.com.
All right. Well, it's so great to talk to you, Marty. Thanks so
Thanks, Amy.
much.
I appreciate it so much.